Look at that.
Hello, fellow adventure party.
Hi. Sorry. Yep. Sorry. Yeah. I kind of
Yeah.
stumbled on and into you there at the beginning, but hi.
Hey,
Hello.
it's
Hey.
like, if we do that all the time, where we just stumble upon each other, but
Uh-huh.
at least it's not in a tavern. I don't know. We could probably put a tavern behind you.
You think?
You think next time you want to film this in a tavern?
Oh, you mean like for real? Oh, I thought you were just going to like green screen it or something.
Oh, we could do that too. I mean, either or. Maybe just the editing will be so good we won't be able to tell, and we'll just add some background music. It'll be
Yeah.
very immersive.
Mm-hmm.
I am Jacob, one of the co-hosts. It is a pleasure to have you here. Come on in, sit down, take your shoes off.
And I'm Kurtis, the other co-host, and don't sit there. That's reserved.
Yeah. We don't talk about that guy.
Mm-hmm.
Last time when we left off, we had a great time talking about Curtis's epilogue character. And I thought it would be only fair to transition to this new one that you started, Kurtis.
Yeah.
Yeah, Curtis started a new campaign along with myself a few like close to a month. Well, actually, no, we started in late July. So it's been like a few months now. Wow, that's weird to think about. We've been playing that one. Wow. Started that one, and then Curtis finished his one that kind of prolonged the inevitable to get to this campaign.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a long slog to get to the end of the last one because, boy, was there a lot going on in real life and the game, but yeah, we made it out.
Oh yeah, this was a crazy summer. I just got back from my brother getting married. This was a crazy weekend for us, but we're still here to talk about D&D. It's one of my favorite things to do with Curtis personally. Other than play Dungeons and Dragons with Curtis, it's probably talk about Dungeons and Dragons with Curtis.
Yeah, I think playing is probably the best, but talking is pretty good too.
Pretty good. Well, let's talk about your character, Kurt. I don't know why I'm clapping so much today.
Sure.
I'm just
You're
excited.
You're excited and you're happy to be here, and you've got some good energy going.
I'm trying to keep the momentum going. I'm just trying
exciting.
to amp myself up. Yeah.
Yeah. See, this is how much he loves D&D, folks. He just can't contain it.
And the only way I am able to contain it is if I
giddy.
clap a few times.
All of Jake's energy leaves from his hands. We know that for sure.
Yes, I definitely talk with my hands quite a bit. So just talking about this is the very first campaign. I know when I sat down to join this campaign that we've been talking about with the Reign of Winter, and then you sitting down to run or play in this one. This was a very unique experience for both of us because we both sat down writing these new characters, however the process is, knowing that this was going to be at least a 2-year campaign.
Yeah.
And that was very unique. I've typically when I sit down to, play a campaign, we don't really know exactly how long we're going to be playing. I mean, we're hoping we're going to play a while, but it's kind of up to the dungeon master, especially if they're doing a homebrew thing and they don't really have a set adventure path. And it's like, well, it could be about a year.
Yeah.
But we both sat down with this one in particular and we're like, it's going to be probably at least 2 years.
Yeah, well, and also the last campaigns the last campaign I finished and you were a part of was the longest campaign I had ever played in, and even though you didn't finish that campaign, it was still probably the longest you had ever played one continuous character.
Yeah, it was the highest level I got, for
especially the highest level you've gotten to going from the beginning, level 1. So yeah,
Right.
for me it was very much like, okay. Every other character I've ever made, I haven't played for over a year, at least not consistently. So that was new, and I also wasn't expecting that when I made KO, the character we talked about last time. So it was interesting kind of weaving it around that, but now I have a new perspective, and it was very interesting writing a character, understanding that, if all goes well in real life, we will be playing this game for 2.5 years at least.
Yeah, yeah, and it's really cool to sit down and kind of knowing that going into it, right? And as you said, it could potentially be, life gets in the way, but also it could be one of the things where maybe the character dies along the way, and we only get maybe a year with this character. So, but we both know that our person, me as a person, is going to be playing in this campaign for a while. So it's really fun to just try to immerse yourself in the world. And I know what's really cool about Pathfinder is that there's D&D I know does this too, but Pathfinder has like specific modules and player guides for specific adventure paths.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. It's like, Dip gets really excited about, here you go. This is basically the premise of the module. And, he likes to phrase it in a way, and I think it actually says it's like a trailer, gives you like a trailer of the overall campaign. And then it comes up with special backgrounds for that particular adventure. And then it'll give you certain boons and things for that adventure. So, for example, my character in this Reign of Winter one is a wayward wanderer, something like that. And he has pluses to history and things like that because he's traveled so much. There's another one that's like a witch hunter. So you get pluses to going up against evil spellcasters. So it's like, it kind of gets you ready for this module. So those are really kind of unique. And so I know for me, when I sat down to write Dara the Bard, I loved poring over that and just making a new character. So I just kind of want to talk about our process when it comes to, in general, of writing characters. When you sat down to write, why don't you tell us a little bit about this character for your new campaign?
Yeah, so kind of like you were talking about, there are these sort of pre-built backgrounds that work for the specific adventure path you're about to go through. And what I think that really helps is avoiding I built this character and they seem kind of completely irrelevant to the plot,
Right.
I made a paladin who hates giants because they swept across his city and we're never going to see a giant once in this campaign. Those kind of things where it's like, oh, well, my entire backstory is meaningless.
Yeah.
They help against that because they kind of force you to adjust parts of your character to make sure that you have a tie into this story that you're about to unfold.
Yeah, which is something I know we both like just in general. And it's really cool to have this book tell you it. But I know we both really like working with the DM to like be immersed and have a character that's ingrained in the world.
Well, and so also something that came out was like, it wasn't like Dip gave us all that list and said, okay, who wants to be what background? It wasn't that at all. It was actually, even before we knew what the campaign was, even before we were like halfway through this campaign, a few of us had already kind of decided, well, my next character, whether it's going to be a backup in case this one dies, or for the next campaign, is going to be blank. And I knew I really wanted to play like a really intense blaster wizard, full evocation, just trying to blow everything up, that kind of a character.
It's time. And sometimes you need that. And I think sometimes, I kind of applaud you for going that direction because I know a lot of people like to sit down and when they play a wizard, it's like, I'm going to be playing the smart person. And it's almost like you're approaching this like, I want to blast stuff.
Well, so we'll get there. But so basically how I did it was like, I know I want to play a wizard. I know I want it to be like this. And I started kind of building slightly the idea of him. And very, very, very early on, another player in our game, Katie, we kind of talked about it and we're like, why don't we connect characters? And she was like, okay, well, I want to play a wizard. And I was like, oh. And then we talked about it a little bit and we talked about it with Dip. And then we were like, why don't we both be wizards? And it was like, that could be very interesting. And that very quickly started adjusting both of our ideas for what our own wizards should be, because we wanted them to feel different, yet still wizards, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And we decided, well, why don't we be siblings? And the reason I'm even a wizard in the first place is because I'm younger than you and I'm like learning from you. And so I'll take 2 levels of fighter first and then start learning wizard stuff so that I'm like 2 steps behind you. And like it started out as this whole thing and it just worked out great. And then after we had figured out all of that stuff, that was when we both came to Dip and we're like, these are the characters we're thinking of. And he was like, okay, here's the backgrounds I think would fit your characters. Try and tie your backstory into those backgrounds and we'll see how it turns out.
That's super cool. That's super cool. I also just now realized I'm not wearing my headphones to hear myself.
Who cares?
Okay. Everyone watching this, like, how come Jake's head looks somewhat smaller now? And
Everyone's
I was wondering
like,
that too.
Oh, Jake's headphones must have broke or something. Oh,
yeah, and I need to have my baby Yoda back here. I'm all out of sorts. There we go.
Yeah, everything's
Now we're good.
Just going bonkers today.
It's just good, but no, that makes total sense. And when you were explaining that,
There he is.
I I had the thought when you were explaining that depending on how it goes and depending on how you and Katie decide to run with things, I was like, because there's like twins in like just, you know, in like fantasy and stories that will like coordinate things, right? In like a fighting way, one goes high, one goes low, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And I like the idea of, and just when you were explaining the concepts, you're going to be kind of a blaster, and I know you've told me previously. I don't know if you just said it, but Katie's going to be more of a support wizard.
So she's going Order of Scribes, I believe. So she's going like quintessential wizard, very book smart, very like, oh, I'm going to take all the spells that can support my team and affect the battlefield. And I'm going to be very, no, I got into magic because it gives me a way to affect the world, and I'm going to use it to my full extent, you know?
Yeah.
That kind of a wizard.
Well, and that's super cool. And, you know, what's nice about wizards just in general is that they're very diverse.
Yeah.
You could be a support and you could also have some spells for damage, right? You can kind of mix because you do get a lot of spells and you have a lot of opportunity to get spells. But like, I just had this idea of like, well, what if you guys thought of yourself as kind of the same person as a wizard, but you only are the part of the wizard that has all the spells, so you're just going to overload on the damage stuff, and then vice versa for her. She's going all the support. I don't know.
And what's really cool is it would get very expensive very quickly, but we can copy spells out of each other's books too.
Yeah.
You know, we both learn 2 new spells every level. But really, we could coordinate and say, I'm going to learn these 2, you learn these 2, and if you want one of them, you can copy one of mine, and if I want one of yours, I can copy one of yours. And so really, we could both be getting like 4 spells per level because we could copy off of each other. So all that to say, like, finally when we finished deciding that that's what we were going to do and that we were going to take very different approaches to wizard, and I very specifically am taking 2 levels of fighter first. 1, because it makes sense story-wise, but 2, it also is incredibly helpful when you're trying to make a heavy blaster caster, because Action Surge is essentially the only way you can cast 2 leveled spells in 1 turn, which drastically increases your damage per round. Once a day, of course.
Right. And it's also something really cool. You get back on a short rest because you also have Arcane Recovery, and you get Action Surge back on a short rest. So it's that's kind of a nice little build.
Isn't Action Surge a long rest?
You get it back every short rest. fighters are the short rest kings.
I thought Action Surge was long rest, and what's the one that gives you health back? That was short rest.
Second wind. Kurtis,
Second
let me tell
wind
you
was
a little
short rest.
secret. Let me tell you a little secret.
Yeah, okay.
You get them both passed on a short rest.
Are you serious?
I'm so serious right now.
Are you kidding me?
This is why I love fighters. Fighters get a lot of they're basic, bro. And I will beg to differ, because fighters, when you have a thing where literally you can make it's like the French vanilla. So you can add, if you want like almonds or nuts in your ice cream, you could do that. You could add brownies to it. You could add caramel sauce to it. You can add chocolate sauce to it. It's like the quintessential, like you could just add a crap ton of flavor to a fighter. And that's why I love fight. Anyway, did you look it up? Did you see?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it's really cool.
That's crazy. I didn't even know that. I was assuming it was once a day. That's pretty fantastic. Yeah, so basically, taking 2 levels of fighter gives me quite a few things. One, it lets me use heavy armor as a wizard, which is fantastic. And 2,
I didn't even think that.
2, it gives me Constitution saving throws, which is also fantastic. Strength and Constitution, yeah. Gives me Constitution saving throws. Gives me decent skills. So proficiency in all weapons and armor. And the ability to use a shield, which as a wizard is pretty dope. So having heavy armor and a shield as a wizard is going to be really cool, especially since I'm planning on being the upfront wizard, and Katie is planning on being the backup wizard. So it's going to be really fun, very interesting. We've already talked a little bit about what our like tactics in battle will be, and all of that's going to start unfolding more and more once I finally get levels of wizard and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. That's going to be super cool when you start feeling the vibe.
I took telekinetic as a feat. That was completely story based. It was basically based around the idea that when I was young, she started trying to teach me magic-y stuff. And I was like, meh, this is kind of boring. But the one thing I did pick up was Mage Hand. But I practiced it so well and so often that it became like a second nature. And so I just always have this invisible Mage Hand up, kind of a thing. And it's part of the theory behind that is like, oh, if she's too far up and an enemy runs up at her, I could push her away from them so that she has a chance to run away and stuff in the middle of battle.
You're right.
So.
And yeah, the fancy thing of not triggering opportunity attacks when it's a willing push. That's really cool. Let me ask you this. How deep do you want to get into background here, like backstory here? Do you want to say a little bit about your backstory? I know we have friends that like to listen to this.
Yeah, the people that play in my campaign listen, so I can't give away too much.
So it might be a little bit tricky. I don't know. Let me. How about this? We can approach it from because I find your stats very interesting. If you want to explain your stats for this character, just because I think that's one just really ballsy, dude. Like you have both for a fighter, both your dexterity and strength are on the weaker side. So he literally has a +2 to his attacks and no modifiers for his damage. And I'm just like, wow.
Yeah. So these first 2 levels are going to be a little rough. I'm banging on the fact that 1, I have really good constitution, so my health is pretty good. 2, I have a really good AC because I've got the heavy armor and shield. And I don't have a negative to attack because I'm using a rapier. My strength is a 9, so -1 there. My dexterity is an 11, so a 0 there. My constitution is at an 18. Very nice.
Nice. Yeah.
And my intelligence is at an 18. I rolled quite well on this character.
You rolled
except
pretty good.
I got a lot of
some negatives and some high ones.
I will say, I rolled highs and lows. I didn't really roll any averages.
Which kind of makes sense for this character that you're going for.
Well, and the reason my constitution is higher is because my background that is from
Yeah.
the book gives me an automatic +2 to my Constitution, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
My wisdom is my dump stat. You were thinking strength was my dump stat.
Yeah.
No, wisdom is my dump stat. It's at a 7.
So that's a -2. Nice.
And my charisma is my one sort of like slightly above average. It's a 16 in my charisma. Yeah. So I'm a very hardy, yet not particularly strong or dexterous, but hardy individual with some good smarts, very bad choices, possibly, with that low wisdom. But also, he tends to be charming and can affect a room. You know, he's got a bit of charisma. So,
which is just so interesting that like you are like, it's like, I don't know. In my head, I'm thinking of like those shows where it's like when the bully picks on the nerd, and the nerd gets back at him because he calculates something like ridiculous and he's able to outsmart the bully and does something silly to get back at him. And then he's just kind of walking away and like, and then makes the whole classroom like laugh because he made the bully get embarrassed. That's literally like what your character is because he's also charismatic.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, so, you know, he's I wanted him to feel charismatic because I wanted to last campaign I had a very low charisma as my character, but I realized that I kind of have a natural tendency to just talk in situations as a player. So I realized that this time I wanted to have a high charisma so that I could do it and also get results, and not just talk a bunch and try and convince somebody of something and then be like, okay, now I roll and add a -3 to that. You know,
right? That's the tricky thing with charisma is like, sometimes your role play, like especially if you're a really good role player. Well, you know, arguably, if you're a really good role player, you maybe roll the stats. But I think sometimes it's wise to pick correct stats for your role playing. Sometimes you can be a little, when you're especially coming up with a character concept that you know you're going to be playing for the next 2 years.
For me, wizards are also a little more just about the mental stats, right? That's kind of what defines them. They're not meant to be physical. You know, their physical stats aren't really meant to be what defines them in my mind. So really, you know, what your intelligence, wisdom, and charisma end up being will kind of define what kind of a wizard you are, you know?
Yeah.
Obviously, you're going to have high intelligence because it's incredibly important for your class, but your wisdom and charisma will really define what kind of wizard you are. If you have a really low charisma and a decent wisdom, then you might be a sort of a shut-in, nerdy character that is just really smart and makes decent decisions, but, you know, stays quiet and in the back. If you have a really high charisma and a low wisdom, like me, you might be the sort to be a little more boisterous and be like, I could blow up your house. So, you know, like,
one
and
flick of the wrist,
use
bud.
that to abuse even more of your, you know, power over people.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like it's also really cool to be that smart general of sorts. You know, you like to be that leader wizard, I think can also be really cool and different.
Well, so something else I will say is a lot of the inspiration for the personality and mindset of this character is coming from a character from a show that I am loving right now, Peaky Blinders. A lot of the inspiration and mindset of this character comes from Thomas Shelby. It's not an exact 1-to-1, but a lot of my inspirations come from him. You know, that sort of like, I'm always 5 steps ahead. I'm always thinking very heavily. And I have sort of a power over people. I'm very in control of my own, what I do, but also I tend to get carried away with my, my intentions sometimes, and sometimes get in too deep and have to dig myself out. And maybe I have a problem with substances, and I have a problem letting people in. And, so that to me is almost like the perfect ideal of really low wisdom, incredibly high intelligence, and above average charisma. That's like exactly what you should kind of be with those things. And it should give you those flaws of like, maybe sometimes I'm a little too ambitious. Maybe sometimes I, don't make the best choice simply because, I get a little too excited about what I'm about to do. And I think I know everything, right? That's kind of the main flaw of this kind of character. It's like your wisdom's really low, so you think you know everything.
Right. And I feel like it's also fun to play with the fact that logically this makes sense. Morally, it may not be. And I feel like maybe that's what that wisdom may, and it can be a little bit fluid, but I feel like that would be kind of the understanding how to manipulate it to also still be quote unquote good or something, or morally seeing the outcome of this versus, no, this makes sense because I'm going to be better. You're going to be better. We're all going to be better for it. But in the end, maybe not really having the foresight of understanding, like, well, it's cursed. So
sure. Well, and even the aspect of like the plan is most important, right? There's a plan, and that plan needs to happen. And since I'm the only one with the plan, I'm not sacrificable. But everyone else,
that's interesting.
Everyone else could be sacrificed for the plan to work. Even people that I care about, because the plan is important,
That's
stuff like that.
Be fun.
Stuff that's like, it wavers on the edge. And so right now he's very, he's chaotic neutral, because he's kind of in the middle of like, if I gotta crack a few eggs, I'm okay with that. He's got this mindset where, he's got past traumas, and I won't go too deep into those. He's got past traumas. He's got reasons to feel like I'm lucky to even be here anymore. I might as well already be dead. So let's just go for it.
Let's just do
I'm
it.
I'm willing to throw everything away. Therefore, I assume everyone else is fine with it too.
That's really fun.
Kind of narcissistic too.
Yeah, well, and that's really fun to also throw in a wizard idea with that whole mentality, because now you're adding in a spell book, and now you can add in like, now you can set rooms on fire, and you don't need a sword, you need your mind, and it can kill more people apparently.
Yeah, and I was kind of telling Dip, like, don't be surprised if, depending on how the party affects me, because that's the one thing you can never account for when you're making a character and you're making their arc that you want to happen. You can't account for the way the party is going to affect them and the way that the things you run into are going to affect them. So I was telling him, like, if he stays at his baseline where he is now for the whole campaign, don't be surprised if by the end of it he's like ready to be a lich. Like totally in for that kind of a feel, like that kind of a wizard. Like he would totally go for that at this current mindset where he is now.
That's really cool.
but in 30 sessions, he might get attached to somebody. He might recognize that those things are bad. He might recognize that the way the party affects him and the way some of his actions affect the people around him might snap him out of something. Who knows?
Yeah.
So maybe by the end he's actually shifted over to chaotic good, and he is willing to make sacrifices, but more on himself than anybody else.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Well, I imagine this is also a type of character that you've been wanting to play for a while. Since, when you play the Star Wars games, you always make the dark side choices on the first time and kill the people. So I imagine this is something in D&D that you've been wanting to do.
Well, and so I don't know if you remember, but Cormac, one of the characters I played in one of your games, was kind of similar to this, but warlock, so a little edgier,
Yeah.
because warlocks just naturally are.
Yeah.
You know, kind of similar to this. He had a brilliant mind. He was intelligent. He invented firearms essentially in your world. I didn't realize this before I created this character, but now it hits me every time I talk about him. He's basically Percy.
Yeah.
From Critical
he's
Role, but
he's
I
basically
did not-
Percy, but you made him like 55 or something. He was older.
Well, he was older,
Right?
and also I kind of flipped the warlock fighter ratio. He was way more
Right.
warlock than he was fighter, so way more affected by his patron.
Right.
Than
Whereas
his own
and
effects.
it's also a little bit difficult because I mean if you're at all familiar with Critical Role, we jumped into Percy's story like they've been playing years before, right? So we almost got to, with this particular character, I feel like we got to experience earlier. We were also playing with the quote unquote demon way earlier than they did.
Yeah.
But so we, if it was copyrighted, it's like we changed it 20%. We're good.
Yeah, oh, for sure. More than 20. But, that was the same kind of thing. And I loved that character. I think Cormac still to this date has been one of my favorite characters I've ever brainchilded, brain birthed.
It might be really fun for an episode just to talk about all the characters that we've already completed and just spill the beans on all those characters. That could be fun. Well, that's really cool. I know when I sat down to write Dara for this upcoming campaign, I wanted to basically just capture the whole idea of a wandering musician who basically is just traveling and he's acting in groups and he's finding a job and he's working there for 2 months and then he's moving on. And then he finds these new people and he learns their stories and then he moves on to the next town a few weeks later. Like I wanted to play a character that was just constantly traveling. And I know I mentioned a little bit about it before where originally he was going to be a warlock and that was going to be the shift. I wanted changing it to be a quintessential bard. But I know when I sit down to write it, I wanted to write the main bulk of the backstory very, very basic. And so what actually I spent majority of my backstory on was I came up with 13 mini stories of meeting people. So I basically was like, I wrote like 2 paragraphs about for example, when he was first on the week, I wrote a little story about how he was attacked by a pack of wolves and very nearly killed. And then an orc out of the forest comes out and saves him. And basically he has a torch and he's able to kill the wolf that's on top of him and he chases off the wolves. Excuse me. And then he takes him back and nurses him back to health and then kind of sends him on his way. So that was the majority of my backstory. And so that was kind of fun to approach a backstory from a sense of, he hasn't stayed in anywhere particularly long. So that's why in my head, why he isn't level 8 or whatever, because he's not like staying with these people and doing these hardcore adventures. He's just kind of learning the stories and moving on type of thing. So I wanted him to kind of feel more like traveled. And so that was kind of fun and different about this particular character I'm doing.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Something I've never really delved into a lot with the characters I've made is, trying to sort of write out very specific things that have happened to them. You know what I mean? A lot of times my backstories, I write them sometimes in first person, but I write them in a very like, and this is my story kind of a way, like a prologue to a book.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Or a prologue to an autobiography. Like, this is how I got to where I am today. And now you're about to see everything that happens to me from there onward, So I've never really focused a lot on very specific happenings, but one thing that we did do this time, which was very fun, was Katie and I, like I said, we were making our characters together and decided they were going to be siblings. By the way, my her character's name is Kitty, and my character's name is Callan.
Kitty and Callan. Does she spell? Please tell me she spells hers with a C.
Nope, with a K. That was the one stipulation I had. I was like, if we make these characters, it's gonna be a K. And she was like, okay, I'll do a K. So our names are Kitty and Callan Kestrel.
Oh, that's so funny.
Like the bird.
Kestrel.
Yeah, Kestrel, which is a super cool last name.
That's
I love that
a
name.
great name.
But so yeah, basically the way our story kind of worked out was after we had gotten kind of the basics and we're like, yeah, we lived in a town just outside of the city for a while, and then our parents kind of left and went on their like retirement voyage. They're just kind of seeing the world because they had us very young. So by the time I was just old enough to basically be an adult, they just kind of were like, okay, sweet, you guys have the homestead now. We're off. We're leaving. Kind of took most of the gold and left, you know. And so we just kind of took care of each other after that. But what Dip did, which was very interesting, was he was like, okay, this is the specific town you guys lived in. This is it. Also,
he pointed on a map because Pathfinder.
He found it on the map and said, this is where you guys stayed. Also, this family is the family that you guys knew and grew up with and helped you out on your homestead throughout the whole time. You invent everything about them. He said, this is how many people there are in the family. This is all of their ages. You come up with names. You come up with personalities. And you come up with how they have affected your character specifically. And so we did that. We came up with the names and stuff, but then we came up with how they affected us separately so that we don't know that in each other's minds, right?
That's so cool.
Like, she doesn't know some of the relationship that I had with some of these characters because we had it in very personal moments. And I don't know how she had relationships with any of the other characters, you know? And so it was very fun because we got to have like a very real impact. And now Dip is like, okay, I have that in my notes. They live in that town now. They're there. Yeah. And they will be there if anyone else ever goes to that town in any other campaigns. So it's just another show of how he's having us affect the world.
Yeah, it's really cool and honestly very needed, even in a pre-written world like this, because that's how it really becomes personal for your table. And there was two things that I love that you mentioned that, and this is basically just two things to take away if you guys are all going to get ready for your backstory. One, your backstory should always be a prologue. It should never be like, I went to the Nine Hells and battled Asmodeus or whatever however you pronounce that. And he he made me, he gave me his sword and et cetera, et cetera. Particularly if you're starting a game at level 1. I think it's very, very important that you always approach a backstory from that perspective.
From this is where your journey is beginning. Not
right, because the campaign should never have to battle for your main story. It should never have to battle with your backstory. That should be what your chapters are going to be. So I think that's a great way to explain a backstory. It should always be your prologue. I think that's great. And one, I think it's particularly when you go to write where two characters are together, wherever that may be, siblings or just childhood friends or however you want to play that. I think you should always have at least a couple secrets from each other, because you should have some sort of pre-relationship that really helps when you go into. But that was something. So in the last game that Kurtis just got out of, when I started in it, I was the half brother of another player in that game, and we had a lot of secrets from each other. But we still had this really cool dynamic that made us different. And at least if something heavy came up in the game, I would always know I need to talk about this with my brother. So it makes it really fun for role play moments. But
Yeah.
I know you, in your in the first session, which we'll get to maybe here in a little bit, it's fun to have secrets from each other because
Yes.
then you're kind of like, oh, what?
Yeah. And so we didn't like necessarily look at each other's full backstories. We just made sure our story was straight in that this is where we came from, these are all the names we need to know, this is how the personalities were, like this is who they are. But when it comes to how I feel about them or how they've affected me, that stays with me. You don't know that. Those kinds of things. Like we are very close, sure, but we still have things the other person doesn't know about, just like anybody does. So it really was very very fun and very interesting to because this is the first time I've ever done it that in depth before, having a backstory that tied into somebody else in the campaign, especially for one that's going to last this long.
Yeah, and it's cool to also kind of be in this place of, from your backstory, you almost got to experience something from your backstory. Because a lot of times when we write one, that's what it is. It's written, and we just have it kind of, in our favorite Word document, and we just read it. But when you add stuff like that, that's like, hey, write something that's not necessarily about your character. Write about this relationship that you guys had with this, right? I think that's one way to help it come to life. That's cool.
Yeah, and we have different people in those family that we were closer with, and I know for a fact that there was a boy in that family that she liked, and I thought it was stupid because he was kind of dumb and all this other stuff, but whatever.
Sibling stuff.
And so, I know that. I know that she liked him and that she got embarrassed anytime she was around him, but I don't know if anything else happened in that. Just like she knows I liked the girl that was in there who was like my babysitter for 2 years. And then, all of that kind of stuff. Like I had a crush on her way bad and she thought it was hilarious, but never did anything about it. And, that's all she knows about that relationship between us.
But there's still little secrets that you probably won't go into.
But there are definitive things that both of us have about other people in this family that the other doesn't know.
That's super fun. So when it kind of came to starting this campaign for you, how was the concept going into it? Like you had this idea in your head, now you get to role play him for the first time. How was that when you sat down? Because it was very interesting how I got to sit in a little bit for it. Dip kept grabbing someone and would go to a different chat while everyone hung out, and then he came back and grabbed one other person while that person came back and hang out. So he was basically like, if you want to think of it, if we were all sitting around a table, he basically would ask everyone but that one character to leave, and then that person would leave and then tell another person to come in, and they would have a little bit, and then it just kept flopping until everyone came in together.
So the way I think about it is he almost had like little mini session zeros with everyone. He had a very, very, very small prologue with every character on their own, talking about, what their day is like that day, and then revealing something to all of us, where we found something. But what he did differently was, since me and my sister live in the same home, after he had done both of our small prologues, he had both of us go in together alone, to do like, okay, well now you've both gotten back to the house. What do you do now? Like you have a chance to talk to each other and maybe talk about what happened in your prologue, maybe not. And we did not. And so we just but that was really fun because we had a moment where, because, both of us had already talked about our voices and our characters and this kind of stuff and how they would interact with each other, but we had never like role played together necessarily yet. And this was a little chance to have like a small little kind of like, okay, training wheels moment of like
little
okay,
practice. Yeah.
okay, we're actually role playing now. This is the game. We're talking to each other as these characters. This is how it feels. Okay, yeah, that feels good. All right, great. Okay, cool, great. Now everyone else come back in, you know.
Right.
It was very helpful and a lot of fun. Yeah, and then once all that was done, we all came back in and ended up in basically a small room together, and just kind of talked for a little bit, and that was very fun, especially because my character went to this place thinking it was a meeting about getting back at someone that he doesn't like.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the campaign just in general? Like, what was your prompt, and just like talk about like what was like the setting, if you will, like going into it. So that way maybe we have some premise going into the session 1.
Yeah, so basically this whole campaign is called Curse of the Crimson Throne, and it's entirely based in a city called Corvosa. And it is essentially a city campaign. It is entirely built here. We all live in this city, and we're almost never going to just leave it, unless something takes us away or we decide as characters to go somewhere.
Yes, winky face.
The entire story, the entire story will revolve around this city. And so we did a lot of work, and Dip did a lot of work in making sure that we understand the city, understand the districts, and understand where we live in that city in order to start helping it feel like a home. Because he wants this place to feel like we know this place and we understand it. And so basically what we all now understand is that we all have parts of our backstory that were introduced by the backgrounds that we all got, that essentially gave us all reasons to hate this one person and want to get back at them. Okay? None of us knew that going in. None of us knew that all of the backgrounds revolved around this one guy, and that that would be what brings us all together. We didn't know that. I especially didn't know that about my sibling, which was very interesting.
That was one of those secrets that I feel like is just almost needed because it's really fun around the table.
So we all have reasons to hate this guy and want to mess him up and find him and get back at him. Whether those reasons are personal or just because he's a douchebag or just because he's...
And I mean, for the record, this guy, this guy is... he's a douchebag. He's a horrible person.
He's a scourge. He's a black spot on the city of Corvosa, and deserves to be taken out. But so for at least one or two of us, that is literally the only reason they're involved, is because, I've heard of that guy and he sucks. So I'll help. And some of us, it's much more deeply personal. Most of us, it seems. We all show, so my wife's character, she's playing in this with us. She shows up to this meeting second. Scott's character, who is the barbarian.
Yes.
He shows up first. So he's already there when she shows up. She is playing a cleric, a knowledge domain cleric, which is very cool. I haven't really seen that played before. It'll be fun.
They're kind of wizardy too, so that's going to be kind of fun.
Lots of high intelligence in this game. And then I show up third to this meeting, not really expecting anyone else to be there, but so basically in all of our prologues, we all got what are essentially tarot cards, but in Pathfinder they're called Harrow cards, with a note on the back saying, meet here at this time if you want to get back at this dude.
Yes.
So I show up third to this meeting, and I'm like, oh, okay, there's going to be other people here. That's cool. That's great. Being more of a high charisma person, I was the first one to kind of like talk and break the ice and be like, hey, how's it going? Yeah, it's cool that you guys are here too, all this kind of stuff, and like introducing myself. And then our bard, who's played by our friend Josh, shows up, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm here too." And he's like a gnome who is hilarious. And then our last person shows up, who is my sibling, and so she shows up, and I turn and look at her, and I'm like, "Oh, come on, like really?" His first reaction when she showed up was like, "This was you, wasn't it? You were trying to determine if I was going to sneak out of the house and sneak away from you and do something stupid. And here I am doing it. You caught me in the act. You're a jerk. You set this up." And the very interesting thing is this whole time my character had been talking in like slightly posh British accent to the other characters. When she shows up, his facade immediately drops and he starts talking in a non-rhotic Southern accent, talking like this and saying, "Hey, how could you? I trusted you. You shouldn't have been here. This is all this kind of stuff. You set me up. All this kind of thing." And so, like, it was almost
which is a very fun accent for a wizard. I will just add.
Yes.
I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. Yeah.
Well, and so they're both essentially Hicks, right? They're from a farming town outside of the city. So she talks like that normally, but he's tried to teach himself to be fancier because
he's been in the city for a little bit.
Yes.
So maybe he's
been in the city for longer than her. So he's like, you talk for the job you want, not where you came from, kind of a thing, you know?
Yeah, that's a good way to think of it. So
he's kind of trying to adjust himself. So she shows up and he's like, "You jerk, this was all you." And then the person who actually brought us there shows up and she's like, nope, it was me. Everything's fine. And I was like, "Oh, okay, that's fine. I'm fine. Everything's totally fine here. We're all fine." And
right back into the main
right back into his accent. Yeah, so it's just very, very fun because we all had these moments of like, wait, we all hate this guy?
Interesting.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, and that's a cool way to rally the party. It's easy to think of, all meeting in a tavern is the classic one, or just all meeting for the first time to pick up a bounty, or just like, "Oh, we happen to be going the same direction. Why don't I come along with you?" type of thing. We both carry swords. But this is kind of fun from a sense of we're all going to meet for a particular purpose. And it kind of like almost kicks you off immediately. But at the same time, also keeping a mystery. It's not like you all rallied together. It was just like, "Oh, who are you?"
Yeah.
We're gonna go take this guy out.
It was kind of cool because this like mysterious benefactor also had a reason to hate this guy and kind of did their research on like, okay, who else doesn't like him? Who else has he messed up? And basically did their research and found all of us kind of separately and was like, "Okay, you're all like-minded people. I can't go to the guards about this, but you all seem able-bodied, so I'm going to ask all of you to kind of all come together, and together we can get back at him."
So you guys almost have like, do you guys have like a patron? Is so this person did the work to get you all together. So what exactly do you know about this person that got you guys together?
So we know that she is, we know that the reason she doesn't like this guy is because, she had her hero deck stolen. So she's a Romani style inspired kind of person. So very deep with like the hero cards and all of this kind of stuff and family ties and everything. And we don't know much about why she was tangled with him before, but we know that he basically, her hero card deck was stolen from him and it was like a family heirloom. It's incredibly important to her. And so her son was like, "Screw that. We're going to go get it back." And so her son went to go get it back from the thugs that took it from her, but didn't know that these thugs were connected to the big bad guy. He got the deck back, brought it back to her and was like, "Don't worry, everything's fine." But when the big bad guy was like, found out that this had happened, he basically kidnapped the son and had him killed and is now after her. And so that's
Okay.
kind of what she has against him, as
So,
far as we
so a little
know.
bit of revenge going on.
Yeah, and so for some of us, that's also the same case. For some of us, I'll say for my wife's character, the cleric, it almost seems like almost like they had a personal relationship, and he was like awful to her, almost like an abuser of sorts. That's how it's kind of come across so far,
Yeah.
which is very interesting. My character has given almost nothing away about what's going on because he believes the person with the most secrets in the room is the hardest to read, and being the
Yeah.
hardest to read in the room is important.
Well, and I almost kind of like the idea of like we get to talk about those secrets when they come out in game. So instead
Well,
of you giving
sure.
out all your secrets now, the moment they come out in the game, that's when you maybe can talk about them.
Sure, but he was also trying to subtly egg on other people and be like, "Well, what's your problem with him? Why don't you like it?" And then they'd ask him, and he'd be like, "Oh, it's nothing big. Don't worry about it." you know. So he also kind of got everyone else to subtly be like, "Oh yeah, here was the card that I found. It had this picture on it." And he was like, "Oh, okay. What
Interesting.
about you?" And they were like, "Oh yeah, this is the card I found." And he was like, "Oh, okay." And they were like, "You want to show us your card?" And he's like, "No."
No, not really.
Um,
I'm good.
so yeah, just kind of making sure he has the most knowledge in the room. Very important to him.
Yeah. No, that's really fun. That's really fun to play. Also, it's really fun to keep in mind you have no idea who these people are.
Exactly. Yes.
Like, are you all walking into a trap? Your sister's
and-
there, in game sister. So it's kind of like,
what I had assumed right at the beginning when she showed up, after I recognized, well, what my character assumed was that it was her that set all this up, my sister. But what I was starting to think as a character, and now what he's starting to think is like, oh, well, maybe her stake in this is what he did to me, and she's going to get back at him for messing with her little brother.
yeah.
But it has pretty quickly become apparent that that is not the case, and that she also actually has a personal issue with him, which is very surprising to me as a player. Seems very interesting because she hasn't even been in the city for very long, and as far as I
Yeah.
know, had barely ever been here before this, except for maybe their very early childhood. So mysteries there
Okay.
too. It's going to be very interesting.
So we'll hear more about that when it comes up in game 2.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Well, cool, man.
A very, very intriguing start. Lots of mysteries to unfold, and we sort of. She was like, "Yeah, he's probably at this fishery. You should go there." And I was like, "Great, let's go right now!" And kind of rallied everyone, and we all went to this fishery and started a fight right away, and it was fantastic. Level
So
one.
he's
Level
already
one.
level. Yes, that is the chant that we all sang around here.
Yes.
And pretty much we sang it we sing it every level. I'm pretty sure, because it's just like, because right now it's kind of like, oh, I took 4 damage. I'm down level 1. Level
Yeah.
1,
Yeah,
and then when you're level 14, it's like, okay, I did 55 damage.
Yeah.
Level 14. Level 14.
Yeah, yeah. I'm pretty lucky to have 14 health. I think I actually have more health than the barbarian right now, because I think his con is lower than mine.
Well,
Or
that
it's
plus
the
four right
same.
off the bat. That's good.
Yeah,
That's good. Heck yeah, dude. Well,
see where it
I'm
goes.
excited to learn more about this campaign. It sounds like there's a lot of mystery, and it's what's really cool about this is that I think the 2 campaigns that we're in could not be more different.
yeah. Yours is
because
like
you
all
guys-
about traveling everywhere and going and doing a bunch of crazy stuff, and for us, it's like, nope, it's a bottle episode. We're in a city the whole time.
Really excited to see the difference, because I love urban setting campaigns, because kind of like what you guys did of just sitting down and just like, I want to know what's the tavern I go to every Friday
Yes.
night. What's the bank, or I don't know, where's the marketplace that I go to, et cetera, et cetera. What's the
Yeah.
people that I talk to? I think that's just a really cool setting, and the fact that I almost feel like, and this may not be for every group and campaign out there, but I almost feel like it's easier to even do solo things for that, right?
Yeah, have moments away.
Yeah, if it ever came up, it's just like you wanted to go, even just something mundane, like you want to just go personally sell something, have your own little shopping thing. It would be very easy for you to just
for sure
go right up the way rather than okay, you guys are all in town. Let's have a shopping episode. I almost feel like it's a little bit
right.
you can have those personal
there's
moments.
less of a like, okay, wait for home base to do role play stuff feeling, because we're always in home base.
Yeah.
We're always in
Right.
town, There might be
Right.
moments where we're like, I mean, I don't know where it's going to go, but there might be moments where we're like in an underground sewer under the town for like 2 days trying to get through this dungeon or whatever. But, for the most part, we're just in town. So if it's like, okay, well, cool, we finished clearing out that thing. I'm going to go run to the bank real quick, put some coins in there, and then I'm going to go sell this thing, and then I'll meet you guys back at the tavern.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, okay, yeah,
Exactly.
great. You could do that anytime you want. It's going to be very weird to get used to, because I am not used to urban campaign settings. I'm very used to the very wide-reaching, adventurous campaigns.
Same here, and which is why I'm really excited to see how this goes. Because, we're running into that where it's kind of like, I really want to have some role play moments because if something came up, but we're kind of fighting for our lives right now. So, so we do kind of have to wait for those moments where it's like, okay, and it's like, oh, we're in a town. Okay, do we need to sell things? Let's run and sell things. There is a fun little twist to it though, because we're very, very foreign to this place. We have no idea where anything is, and everyone looks at us very mysteriously, like we're foreigners. So it does add a really cool vibe to it. But I don't know. I just really like the fact that we are playing probably in very different campaigns. It's going to be very cool. So next time on the Backyard Tabletop, we'll be talking a little bit about our last session, on my group's last session on the attack on the Pale Tower. My wife's character almost died, so that's a little teaser for next time. It was very, very scary, but it was also very adrenaline pumping, and it's sometimes we need those sessions because they're very fun.
I can't wait for session 2, because I feel like that's where all of the actual craziness starts. Session 1 is all about like, here's my character, here's where I'm kind of like parsing out everybody else, and I'm trying to think about things, and my role play isn't quite there yet, and all this kind of stuff. And then session 2 is where you've had time to go, okay, I've thought about this, that role play felt weird, I'm going to shift that a little bit. Also, okay, now I know where we're going. And also, okay, now we can just play in session 2, So session 2, I'm very excited.
Yeah, you're getting the story started, and then I also find I start paying a little bit more attention to the other players around like, 2, 3, 4, the fourth session type of thing, because it's like the first session, especially, you're trying to focus on your character. How do they feel? How do they talk? What's their story? And then afterwards, you're kind of like, okay, I kind of got a feeling. And then you kind of get that feeling. And then now you're looking at the other players and like, okay, what are they? What are some cool moments that they did that I can ask them about, and certain moments or gestures or et cetera, et cetera.
Especially for me, being a high intellect character, but also someone who's, willing to manipulate others and stuff. He's going to be paying very close attention to the other characters and the other people we meet to determine their weaknesses, their strengths, their mindsets, which is something I'm going to have to get used to also, because my last character was very focused on himself and adjusting himself and changing himself rather than the others around him. Yeah.
Well, and that's also going to be interesting because since you're in an urban setting, if you could potentially manipulate, potentially blackmail a couple people, but what happens if they see you on the street the next day, type of thing?
Right.
Like you kind of, I feel like, and I don't know, I know some Pathfinders have like scales, like, or modules have scales like this, But if there's like some sort of reputation system going on, like if
Sure.
you start doing stuff like that more and more, and maybe even start twisting a few arms of some merchants or something like that in order to get your way, what's that effect going to be like, right?
And there's less of an idea of, I'm an adventurer. I'm moving on constantly. I'm never going to see this person again. Who cares if I cast Charm Person on them?
Exactly.
Here in the city, if they run a booth in a square that I'm going to go to pretty consistently, if I cast Charm Person on them this time, next time I'm there, they're going to call the guards on me, or something like that. So consequences are heavier too.
Yeah. So that's kind of fun to think about. I'm very excited to see how that goes, but I feel like that could also lead to some really cool moments of being able to manipulate certain gangs or groups, et cetera, et cetera.
We'll see.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for listening. If you made it this far, you're awesome. Thank you so much. Kurtis and I love doing this, love keeping up with our own games, and we love to share it with the world. So I am your co-host, Jacob Kurhurst. I'm a
You're our co-horse.
I am co-host Jacob.
I am co-host Kurtis.
Thank you so much for listening to the Backyard Tabletop. Backyard Tabletop. Man, it's getting a little warm in this room. I'm not gonna lie.
Goodbye, everyone.